Hello everyone! Sa videong ito ay pag-uusapan natin ang final income taxation. Disclaimer lang guys ha, itong dinidiscuss ko ay kinuha ko sa aklat ni Sir Rex B. Banggawan CPA MBA. Yung book niya ay entitled Income Taxation, Laws, Principles, and Applications. Also, this video is for academic or educational purposes only. So this is dedicated to my students and also sa mga ibang estudyante na rin na nahihirapan sumabay sa kanilang discussions in their classrooms. At least dito, you guys can post the video and then pwede yung balik-balikan yung mga konsepto na talagang nahihirapan kayong intindihin. And with that being said, I think kailangan na nating simulan ng ating discussion and we'll start with the features of final taxation. Features or characteristics of final taxation. So ano-ano nga ba yung characteristics ng final taxation? Therefore, we have the first one, final tax. 2, it's a tax withholding at source. 3, it's a territorial imposition. 4, it is imposed on certain passive income and persons not engaged in business in the Philippines. Okay, discuss natin to isa-isa. We have this term in taxation na final withholding system. So, under the system, kung sino yung magbabayad ng income, siya yung may responsibility na mag-withhold ng tax. For example, sa bank, let's say si depositor nag-open siya ng certificate of time deposit worth of 10,000 pesos and then the term is 1 year. And let us assume that the corresponding interest rate for that is 2%. So 10,000 pesos times 2%, that is equal to 200 pesos. So, etong 200 pesos, ito yung interest income na babayaran ni bank kay depositor. However, under the final withholding system, si bank ngayon, meron siyang responsibility na mag-withhold ng tax out of the interest income. For interest income of this kind, the corresponding final withholding tax rate is at 20%. So that means the interest income of 200 multiplied by the final withholding tax of 20%. So 200 times 20%, that will yield us the amount of 40 pesos. So that is now the final withholding tax. So ibig sabihin nito, ang matatanggap lang ni depositor as interest income is only 160. Supposedly, 200 pesos yun. Kaya lang, under the final withholding tax system again, si bank nagwi-withhold siya ng tax. And here in the illustration, that is the 40 pesos. So, the 40 pesos tax which is deducted at source is a final. So, ibig sabihin nun, si taxpayer, which in this example is the depositor, hindi na niya kailangan pang mag-file ng income tax return in order to report his interest income. So, si bank na yung bahala nun. So, si bank na yung mag-remit kay BIR, no? I-remit ni bank sa BIR yung lahat ng mga taxes na na-withhold niya. Another characteristic of a final income taxation is that it is inherently territorial. So, applicable lang siya on certain passive income na na-earn from sources within the Philippines. You have to take note that mismo yung taxation natin is territorial. So, hindi natin pwedeng obligahin sa tax when it comes to filing or withholding yung mga non-resident subjects natin of foreign sovereignty. Final income taxation is imposed for the convenience of both the taxpayer and the government. On the part of the taxpayer, convenient siya in the sense na hindi na niya kailangan pa mag-file ng income tax return para i-report yung passive income niya. On the part of the government, yung final income taxation is not only for the convenience but also it's an effective way para makapag-collect ito ng tax on income na medyo may high risk of non-compliance or tax evasion. Halimbawa, yung income ng mga non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business or yung mga non-resident foreign corporations. Etong mga to kasi wala silang fixed place of business dito sa Pilipinas. So, medyo risky talaga siya kasi yung distansya, tsaka hindi naman sila at all times nandito sa Pilipinas eh. So, mahirap. One more thing also, itong mga to, hindi naman pwedeng obligahin ng Philippine government na mag-file ng income tax return. Kasi nga yung taxation natin is subject to territorial limitation. Okay, again, final income tax is imposed on certain passive income. Kung ano-ano mga ito ay pag-uusapan natin later on. Number 2, final income tax is imposed on non-resident persons not engaged in business in the Philippines. When we say passive income, by the way, it means or it refers to income that are earned with very minimal involvement from the taxpayer and are generally irregular in timing and amount. So this is in contrast to active income. Pag sinabi nating active income, ito yung income na pinagtratrabahuan ni taxpayer. Ito yung income na pinagpawisan talaga si taxpayer bago niya to makuha. Halimbawa, yung sahod niya from his or her work. Yung passive income naman, ito yung income na parang walang ginagawa si taxpayer, no? Hindi siya pinagpawisan. Passive income yon. And then for non-resident persons not engaged in business in the Philippines, this actually refers to non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business and non-resident foreign corporation. So for non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business, he or she is subject to 25% final tax rate, while the non-resident foreign corporation, it will be subject to 30% final tax rate. And here's now the list of passive income subject to final tax. So we have interest or yield from local bank deposits or deposit substitutes. We also have domestic dividends in general, a dividend income from a real investment trust, share in the net income of a business partnership, taxable associations, joint ventures, joint accounts or co-ownership, royalties in general, prices exceeding 10,000 pesos, winnings, informers tax reward, and lastly, the interest income on tax-free corporate covenant months. So, pag-uusapan natin sila isa-isa later on. And then, I would like to remind you guys that the final tax rates na i-discuss natin as we go along to each specific kind of passive income, applicable po sila to all taxpayers, either individuals or corporations, except lang sa mga non-resident aliens not engaged in trade or business or NRA, NATB, and also with the non-resident foreign corporations or NRFC. Kasi meron silang kanilang final tax rate for their active and passive income, which is ito. So for non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business, they are subject to 25% general final tax rate, and for non-resident foreign corporation, they are subject to 30% general final tax rate. Okay, so now pag-uusapan natin isa-isa yung mga passive income subject to final tax, and we'll start with the interest or yield from local bank deposits or deposit substitutes. So, interest income may come from short-term deposits or long-term deposits or long-term investments. So, for the interest income coming from short-term deposits, it is subject to 20% for individuals and then also 20% for corporations. And then for interest income from long-term deposits or long-term investments, that is exempt on the part of individuals. And then for corporations, it would still be 20%. Okay, when we say short-term deposits, this refers to any deposits that are made for a period of less than 5 years. And then for long-term deposits or investment certificates, it could refer to CTDs or certificate of time deposits or investment in the form of savings, common or individual trust funds, deposit substitutes, investment management accounts, and other investments with a maturity of not less than 5 years. So, take note with the keywords, no? Pag sinabi natin short-term deposits, yung maturity niya is less than 5 years. No, hindi lalampas sa 5 years. And then for long-term deposits or long-term investments, yung maturity naman niya is not less than 5 years. So, hindi bababa sa 5 years. In other words, that is 5 years and up, no? Pag ang maturity is 5 years and up, that is a long-term deposit or a long-term investment. And then take note class ha, etong individual recipient ng interest income, hindi kasali dito si non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business. And then for corporations, hindi kasali si non-resident foreign corporation. Kasi nga, meron silang sariling general final tax rate which is eto. No, again, for non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business, yung general final tax rate nila is 25%. And then 30% naman for non-resident foreign corporations. So, itong exemption ng individual recipient with respect to interest income coming from long-term deposits or investment certificates, hindi kasali dito si non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business. So again, hindi kasali sa exemption si non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business. Kasi again, meron siyang kanyang sariling general final tax rate which is the 25%. Alright, so now let us apply what we have just learned in the following illustration. So we have the first one. A taxpayer earned the following interest income from various time deposits. So for the 6-month time deposit, the interest income is 8,000 pesos. For the 2-year time deposit, 12,000 pesos. For the interest income from the 5-year time deposit, 40,000 pesos. So the total of this or the total interest income is 60,000 pesos. And then the requirement, we have to compute a final tax if the taxpayer is an individual and if the taxpayer is a corporation. Okay, we'll start with the first one. If the taxpayer is an individual. Okay, take note that the rule of maturity, whether short term or long term, is only applicable for the individual. So here we have to identify each interest income, whether it is coming from a short-term deposit or a long-term deposit. Before answering the question, let us have this very quick review about the interest income or yield. So, unahin muna natin itong sa individuals. So, if yung interest income is coming from the short-term deposits, so the interest income is going to be subject to the 20% final tax. Pero kung yung interest income is coming from the long-term deposit or long-term investment, exempt siya. So, pag sinabi natin short-term yung deposit, that means yung maturity niya is below 5 years. Tapos, long-term deposit or long-term investment siya if yung maturity niya is 5 years and up. Okay, so balikan na natin tong problem. So, ang gagawin natin dito is that isa-isahin natin na i-identify whether itong interest income na ito is galing sa short-term or long-term deposits. Okay, we'll start with the 6-month time deposit. Okay, 6-month time deposit. Is it short-term or long-term? Diba yung timeline natin, kung 5 years kung 5 years below, that is short term. Tapos 5 years and up, that is long term. So, 6-month time deposit, obviously, this is a short term deposit. So, this will be subject to 20% final tax. So, we have 8,000 times 20%. So, that is equal to 1,600 pesos. Next is the 2-year time deposit. So 2 year. So 2 years. So that is still less than or that is still below 5 years. So short term pa rin. So again, this will be subject to 20%. So 20% of 12,000, that is 2,400 pesos. And then lastly, we have the interest income from a 5-year time deposit, which is 40,000 pesos. Okay. 5-year time deposit. Is it short term or long term? Of course, this is long term kasi yung maturity period ng long term deposits is 5 years and up. And then this one here is a 5-year. So, obviously, this is a long-term deposit. So, pag sinabi nating long-term deposit, so yung interest income niya is exempted from the final tax. So, walang final tax to. And so, the final withholding tax of the individual taxpayer is 4,000 pesos. So that is 1,600 plus 2,400 pesos. Now, what if the taxpayer is a corporation? Ano nga ba yung magiging final tax? Okay, review muna natin. Okay, so we have it here. So for recipient corporations, so interest income either from short-term or long-term deposits, that will be subject to 20% final tax. So walang rule of maturity dito. So, short-term or long-term, 20% agad yung final tax rate. So, dito sa problem, kunin na lang natin agad yung total interest income, which is 60,000. Tapos, multiply natin sa final tax rate na 20%. So, 60,000 times 20%. So, the final tax for corporate taxpayers is 12,000 pesos. Again, for recipient corporations, walang rule of maturity, either short-term or long-term yung deposit that is subject to 20% final tax. Let us now move on to the second illustration. We have here a resident taxpayer received a 16,000 pesos interest income from a bank. So we are asked to determine the final tax withheld at source. So dito, si taxpayer, nakatanggap daw siya ng 16,000 pesos interest income galing sa bangko. So, di ba, under the final withholding system, yung nagbabayad ng income, siya yung may responsibility na mag-withhold ng tax. So, dito sa illustration na to, ang nagbabayad ng income dito ay si bangko. So, therefore, si bangko din yung may responsibility para mag-withhold ng tax. And then, di ba, under the final withholding system, yung matatanggap ni taxpayer is already net of tax. Which means, dito sa illustration na to, etong 16,000 pesos na natanggap ni taxpayer is already net of tax. So, ibig sabihin, ang interest income talaga ni taxpayer is more than 16,000 pesos. Kaya nga lang, si bangko kasi may responsibility siya na mag-withhold ng tax. Kaya, ang natanggap ni taxpayer is only 16,000 pesos. And then the corresponding final tax rate for interest income is 20%, right? So, let's put it here, final tax. So, this is 20%. Tapos, etong interest income, this is the 100% kasi ito yung base natin sa computation ng ating final tax. So, 100% less 20%, so that is equal to 80%. So, therefore, etong 80% dito is the net interest income na 16,000 pesos. So, before we can compute for the final tax, kailangan muna nating alamin kung magkano yung total interest income or yung gross interest income, yung kabuuan ba, kabuuang interest income, yung hindi pa nababawasan ng final tax. So, how to do it? Kailangan lang nating i-divide yung net interest income na 16,000 by its corresponding ratio, which is 80%. So, 16,000 pesos divided by 80%, that will give us the answer of 20,000 pesos. So, ito yung gross interest income or yung total interest income. And then from that, we can now compute the final tax withheld by the bank. So, ang gagawin lang natin is that i-multiply natin ang gross interest income na 20,000 by the corresponding final tax rate for interest income, and that is 20%. So, 20,000 times 20%. So, the final tax withheld is 4,000 pesos. Check nga natin kung tama ba. So, the gross interest income is 20,000. Tapos, less natin ang final tax withheld, which is 4,000. So, 20,000 minus 4,000. So, the answer is 16,000. So, ito yung net interest income, which is equal to the given amount here in the problem. Okay, so now let's try to solve another problem. Okay, we have here, Banco Negro incurs the following interest in its savings and time deposit accounts from the following depositors. Okay, we have from resident individuals, 600,000 pesos. Resident and domestic corporations, 800,000 pesos. Non-resident aliens not engaged in business, 200,000 pesos. Non-resident corporations, 100,000 pesos. So the total accrued interest expense is 1,700,000 pesos. And then our task here is to compute kung magkano nga ba yung total final income tax na dapat i-withhold ni Bangko Negro. So, ang gagawin natin dito ay i-identify kung magkano yung final tax rate for each given depositor. Okay, so we have here the solution. Pakita ko na sa inyo, tapos explain ko. Ayan, so for resident individuals, the corresponding final tax rate for them is 20%. So 20% multiplied by their interest income, which is 600,000 pesos. So the final tax would be, or the final tax is 120,000 pesos. And then for resident and domestic corporations, so their equivalent or corresponding final tax rate is also 20%. So 20% times or multiply by their interest income, which is 800,000 pesos. So the final tax is 160,000 pesos. For non-resident aliens not engaged in business, their corresponding general final tax rate is 25%. So therefore, 25% multiplied by their interest income, which is 200,000 pesos. So the final tax would be, or the final tax is 50,000 pesos. And then for non-resident corporations, their general final tax rate is 30%. So 100,000 pesos interest income multiplied by the 30%. So the final tax is 30,000 pesos. And then now we need to get the total final tax kasi yun yung uh, hinihingi sa atin ng problem. So, 120,000 plus 160,000 plus 50,000 plus 30,000. So, therefore, the total final tax na i-withheld ni Bangko Negro ay 360,000 pesos. Okay, so let us now move on to the effect on pre-termination of long-term deposits of individuals. If the deposit or investment placement of individual taxpayers is pre-terminated before 5 years, any previously untaxed or exempted interest income will be subjected to the following final taxes upon pre-termination. So, if the holding period is less than 3 years, that will be subject to 20% final tax. If the holding period is 3 years to less than 4 years, that its corresponding final tax is 12%. If the holding period is 4 years to less than 5 years, so the final tax rate would be 5%. And if the holding period is 5 years or more, so there will be no final tax or 0% yung final tax rate niya. Oh, naintindihan niyo ba yung sinasabi nito? Hindi, 'di ba? Okay, so para mas malinaw, kailangan nating puntahan yung example nito. Ito yun. On January 1, 2016, Alice invested 1 million pesos in Baguio Bank's 5-year time deposit. The deposit pays 10% interest annually. And then Alice terminated the deposit on July 1, 2019. So, si Alice daw nag-invest ng 1 million pesos para sa isang 5-year time deposit. So, 5-year time deposit. So, this is a long-term deposit, di ba? Kasi yung maturity ng long-term deposit is 5 years and above. So, pasok to. So, long-term deposit to. So, supposedly, exempted to sa final tax. Kaya nga lang, si Alice nagbago yung isip niya. Hindi na siya nakapaghantay ng 5 years. Ginawa niya, withdraw niya yung lahat on July 1, 2019. So, ano ba yung magiging epekto nito? Ang sabi dito, because of the pre-termination of the deposit, lahat ng mga untaxed na interest income ay kailangan ng i-tax. However, before we can compute for the final tax, kailangan muna nating alamin kung magkano nga ba yung total interest income ni Alice from January 1, 2016 until the pre-termination date, which is on July 1, 2019. So from January 1, 2016 to December 31, 2016, that is 1 year. So 1 million pesos times annual interest rate of 10%. So yung interest income niya every year is 100,000. So same goes with the year 2017 and 2018, tag 100,000. Ngayon, sa July, sa 2019, kasi hindi natapos yung taong 2019 na pre-terminate yung deposit on July 1, 2019. So, magkano nga ba yung interest from January 1, 2019 until July 1, 2019? Okay, so the way we compute it, until June 30, 2019 lang siya. So, January, February, March, April, May, June. So, there are 6 months. Okay, so 1 million, which is the deposit, amount of the deposit multiplied by the annual interest rate of 10%, and then multiplied by the number of months from January to June, that is equivalent to 6 months, divided by 12. So that is 50,000 pesos. You can also compute it that way. So 1 million times 10% annual interest, so that is equal to 100,000. Tapos divide natin by 12 months para malaman natin kung magkano yung monthly interest. And then yung sagot nun, multiply natin by 6 months, no? 6 months from January to June 2019. So whichever formula or whichever way of computation you're going to use, the same answer will appear. That is 50,000. And then after that, kunin na natin yung total interest income. So i-add na natin lahat. So the total is 350,000 pesos. So now that we already have the total interest income, which is 350,000 pesos, pwede na tayong mag-compute ng final tax. So 350,000 pesos, multiply natin sa final tax rate, which is 12%. So yung final tax ni Alice is 42,000 pesos. Okay, saan galing yung 12% na final tax rate? Take note that yung deposit ni Alice started on January 1, 2016, tapos pre-terminate niya on July 1, 2019. So how many years is that? So January 1, 2016 to December 31, 2018, no? 2016, 2017, 2018. So that is 3 years. And then meron tayong from January 2019 to July 2019. So that is 6 months. So yung holding period ng deposit ni Alice is 3 years and 6 months. So that is less than 4 years. So that will fall in this category. So, yung corresponding final tax niya is 12%, no? Again, yung holding period is 3 years to less than 4 years. Okay, so alamin naman natin kung magkano yung matatanggap ni Alice during the pre-termination date on July 1, 2019. So, to compute for that, we'll start with the amount of investment, no, the amount of deposit of Alice, which is 1 million pesos. Tapos add natin yung na-compute nating interest from January 1, 2019 to June 30, 2019. That is 50,000. Tapos deduct natin yung na-compute din nating final tax, which is 42,000 pesos. So the answer to that is 1,008,000 pesos. So ito yung net proceeds to be released to Alice. So, ito yung matatanggap niya. And if you're asking kung bakit 50,000 pesos lang yung interest income ni Alice, that is because yung interest income niya in the prior years, that is already assumed or presumed na natatanggap na niya. Then, take note that the final tax is only limited to banks and therefore it cannot be applied to the time and savings account deposits maintained by the members of the cooperatives and by the primary cooperatives with their federations. So, yung final tax daw is only applicable for banks, hindi siya applicable sa savings account deposits ng mga cooperative members. However, the final tax on interest is applicable in the following: deposit substitute, government securities, money market placements, trust funds, and other investments evidenced by certificates prescribed by BSP. Now let's talk about interest income from foreign currency deposit with foreign currency depository banks. So if the taxpayer here is a resident, no, it could be a resident, a citizen, resident alien, resident foreign corporation, or a domestic corporation, they will be subjected to the final tax rate of 15%. However, if the taxpayer is a non-resident, no, that includes non-resident citizen, non-resident alien, and non-resident foreign corporation, they will be exempted from the final tax. And then take note that here, there is no long-term or short-term classification of foreign currency deposits. So there is no long-term or short-term classification of foreign currency deposits. For interest income on joint accounts on foreign exchange deposits, meaning to say the bank account is owned jointly in the name of a resident taxpayer and a non-resident taxpayer. So what will be the effect? So as to the share of the non-resident taxpayer, the 50% is exempt, while the other 50% owned by the resident taxpayer, that will be subject to the 15% final tax. Okay, so para maintindihan talaga ang konseptong ito, kailangan nating tingnan yung example. Ayan. Mr. Seaman is an overseas Filipino worker. He deposits all his savings in a savings account under the Foreign Currency Deposit Unit, or FCDU, of a domestic bank. During the month, the savings deposit account earned $1,000 interest, which is equivalent to 41,500 pesos. Okay, so we have three scenarios. So, scenario 1, Mr. Seaman deposited his savings through the account of his resident wife. Second scenario, Mr. Seaman deposited his savings through a joint account with his resident wife. Third scenario, Mr. Seaman deposited his savings account through his own account. Okay, so apply natin yung mga rules na diniscuss natin kanina. We'll start with the first scenario. So sabi sa first scenario, dineposit daw ni Mr. Seaman yung kanyang savings sa account ng kanyang resident wife. Okay, so magkano nga ba yung final tax ng interest income dito? So hindi naman sinabi na joint account, diba? So therefore, ang applicable rule nito ay this one. And then, yung misis ni Mr. Seaman ay isang resident citizen, so therefore dito siya na category. So yung interest income will be subject to the 15% final tax. Okay, so ang gamitin natin for computation is already the amount of interest income in pesos. So therefore, 41,500 pesos interest income multiply natin sa 15% final tax. So the answer or the final tax would be 6,225 pesos. So ito yung final tax na babayaran for the interest income. Okay, second scenario na tayo, at ang sabi, si Mr. Seaman daw nag-deposit siya ng savings through a joint account with his resident wife. So, si Mr. Seaman kasi OFW siya, so siya si non-resident. And then, yung wife niya, resident kasi andito lang sa Pilipinas. So, joint account. So, ano ba yung effect pag joint account? So, ang sabi dito, pag joint account, yung interest income daw ay hahatiin sa dalawa, no? 50% kay Mr. Seaman, tapos 50% sa kanyang asawa. So, gawin natin 41,500 pesos interest income multiplied by 50%. So, ang sagot niyan is 20,750 pesos. So, I mean to say, si Mr. Seaman, meron siyang 20,750 pesos na interest income. Tapos, si wife, resident wife, meron din siyang 20,750 pesos. Tapos, ang sabi pa, yung share ng non-resident citizen or any non-resident, yung share ni non-resident ay exempt. So, sino ba yung non-resident dito? Obviously, si Mr. Seaman kasi OFW siya eh. No? Pag sinabi tayong OFW, so he's working abroad. Wala siya dito sa Pilipinas. So, exempt yung share niya from the final tax. And then, yung 50% daw, yung isang 50% daw will be subject to the final tax. So, kaninong 50% to? Kay resident wife. So, si resident wife, siya yung magbabayad ng 15% final tax sa kanyang interest income. So, ganito yun. Yung share ni wife from the interest income is 20,750 pesos. So, multiply natin sa kanyang tax, final tax, that is 15%. So, yung final tax niya is 3,112.50. Let us now proceed to the third scenario. At ang sabi, si Mr. Seaman daw, dineposit niya yung savings niya sa kanyang sariling account. Okay, sa kanyang sariling account. So, di ba si Mr. Seaman, OFW siya. So, he's working abroad. Wala siya sa Pilipinas. So, non-resident siya. So, dahil non-resident siya, exempted siya from the final tax. Ayan. Then, we have here something that you have to take note. No, the following interest income daw are subject to regular tax. Okay, etong mga nakalista dito, they are not subject to final tax, but are subject to regular tax. First, we have lending activities, whether or not in the course of business. 2, investment in bonds. 3, promissory notes. 4, foreign sources, whether bank or non-bank. And then 5, penalty for legal delay or default. So these 5 items are subject to regular tax, not final tax.